the channel. Today I am bringing back even more ASMR horror stories, this time from my own personal collection. I have hundreds of short stories and flash fiction stories ranging from fantasy to the disturbing that I will be sharing here a little bit at a time. If you like this content and want to see more, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. If this video gets a good reaction, I will continue sharing more of my original stories here. I post multiple times a week, so if you click the bell button, you will be notified of my next video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Now on to the stories. I was 15 years old when the first one drowned. Don't worry about it, Lana said quietly, as if we were in an audience presence. It happens to all of us after a while. We sat poking holes in the spongy marsh for what seemed like hours, as the limp puppy finally sank out of sight into the blue abyss. Weak air pockets popped up against the surface of the water, resembling ants flowing out of their nests. At first there was a surge of bubbles, into the final 2 or 3 slowly surfaced minutes later. My girlfriend nudged my arm. "Hey, Joe." She pecked my cheek. "It'll be all right, okay?" I believed her. After all, I wasn't such a terrible person. So my sister's new puppy died, so what? It's the circle of life. Things die every day. All I did was speed up the process. That night, we took the long way home like usual. Lana insisted we stop at Kepi's for a smoothie. Despite my telling her I was feeling just fine, she didn't buy it. "You can never stay sad with a cup of ice cream, Joe," she chirped. "Things will pick up for us," she promised. 4 months later, we were back at the bayou. I don't know what happened. I collapsed in her arms. Shutting my eyes hard enough wasn't enough to wash away the sight of the strangled tomcat at the water's edge. My hands burned from where I held the kitten, a cold reminder of my rampant fury. "You believe me, don't you?" "Of course, Joe." She rubbed my back and stroked my hair. "Just another accident." "Whose was it?" "Carrie's from across the street." This one was different than the first. For some reason, Lana didn't seem so sympathetic. The night was still, making her rapid heartbeat that much more audible. She was an over-analytical human being, always overthinking and anxious. "Do you still love me?" "Forever and always," was the last thing she said. As she looked in my eyes, I saw the demon. It possessed her small body, the orchestrator of these little evils. It was her fault I did those awful things. We took the short route back home, never saying goodbye when we reached her house. The next day, Lana didn't show up at school. She screened all my calls, wouldn't answer any of my texts. So after school, I found her crocheting in her room and we went to the swamp together. A burning chain around her neck, I pressed her deceitful face into the soggy sludge. Lana tried breaking free, but that only made me tighten the chain. "I'm doing this to save you." Her cries were muffled under my muddy palm. I sat on her writhing body in the slush until the dark clouds passed, and I could see my reflection in her pale eyes. The obsidian demon stared back at me, smirking, its eyes two colliding hurricanes. "You won't do it," it hissed. "You're too weak." My thumbs pressed into her windpipe, the blood draining from her beautiful face. With each squeeze, the demon roared. Ravens gathered around us, taunting me. They were shouting their obscenities, but I kept strong. I had to save her. had to save us all. At last she fell limp in my grasp, her cries frozen forever on her tongue. But the demon remained. It followed me to the water, displayed in my reflection. The devil in her eyes was me. I was 17 when the rest of them drowned, a king reborn. Nothing seemed real after 13 years in space. The ground felt too mushy, the buildings too large, the people minuscule. This had been Ethan's second successful mission, the first of which he only spent a few years at ISS, so the transition wasn't that rough, but this time was different. Ethan watched as his comrades left the station, warm under their family's embrace. He had been waiting nearly an hour for his beautiful wife Sharon and daughter Beth. The last time, Beth brought him a coffee mug she had painted in Miss Gella's class, and Sharon gave him unbelievable sex that night, but they never showed. Suddenly, the space expedition didn't feel as extensive. It didn't take long before the taxi arrived. Despite his insistence that Sharon would be there, he needed only be patient. Sergeant Blim ushered the exhausted astronaut into the yellow cab and called it a day. On the road, Ethan saw his girls' faces in everything. They were in the bricks in the sidewalk. They were the faces on the billboards. And they were ripples in the water. Every sound was that of Willie Nelson. Not only was he Sharon's favorite singer, but he woke up to Always on My Mind every morning on the shuttle. It was another way he felt closer to his girls. The only thing keeping him from going into full panic mode was their crumpled portrait in his pocket. He distinctly remembered taking the photograph during Beth's 7th birthday party at Kiki's Pizza. Sharon looked so goddamn beautiful even with the mouth full of pepperoni, and his daughter was just as striking. Suddenly, Ethan felt a rise in his stomach. Beth was going to be 21 this year. After 13 years, he wouldn't be surprised if she didn't even remember him. Hell, she probably moved away. Don't do this, Ethan, he thought. All I need is the driver to think I'm a big-ass crybaby. But he couldn't stop. He imagined Sharon wrinkled and gray. Their corky Vinny was probably dust in the ground by now. And shit, she could have sold the house and be living with a tight 20-something, surging with stamina and a jawline for days. What an idiot he was to think things could simply go back to normal after he returned. He pressed his head against the window and firmly shut his eyes, allowing the darkness to drown him. Obscurity was his only friend. He should have told the doctor during the post-exhibition physical of his night terrors and the depression. But all that was on his mind at the time was kissing his girls. Ethan's reservations disintegrated as the car came to a stop. The house looked just like he had left it. The only difference was the addition of a purple Volkswagen. But his white Saturn was still parked in his spot. He rang the doorbell 3 times to no avail. However, he let himself in with the key concealed under the second stepping stone in the front yard. Sharon should have moved their key to a better location, but Ethan was overjoyed that she kept it there throughout the years. Ethan never felt more welcome. The interior of the house had been renovated. Ethan's grandparents' old furniture had been replaced with a modern leather love seat, and the wall was nearly non-existent behind a massive plasma screen. He heard footsteps in the back. Sharon, Ethan called, heading down the hall near their room. Oh. Sharon had her back turned, fixing Beth's golden hair. Ethan could not believe his eyes. The last time he saw Beth, she was picking boogers out of her nose, waving goodbye. Hello? A voice piped from the bathroom. It was a male's voice, and something about it felt familiar to Ethan. Abruptly, Sharon and Beth turned around, their faces horrifyingly cracked frosted glass. Tiny whispers and raucous whimpers filled the room. Blazing fingers and checkered tongues swiftly tore through the walls, shattering picture frames and setting fire to the floral wallpaper. Thick gobs of black bile dripped from the ceiling, covering the two women in obsidian vomit. Beth charged, narrowly missing Ethan before shattering into a million pieces on the floor. Sharon emitted a blood-curdling shriek. Ethan ran before Sharon could attack him. He whipped past Beth's old room-turned office and hopped over the sheet glass coffee table in the living room. He dodged spiraling silverware and planet mobiles in the kitchen. Burning candles exploded as he passed them, covering his shirt in clumpy red and orange wax. Tattered scarves and jackets latched onto his hands and feet. The plasma TV sparked and blipped, static scrolling the screen. Hundreds of pages of Ethan's graduate research blanketed the floor. One in particular, the third page of his dissertation, caught his eye. Etched in gold ink on the page was a strange symbol. He recognized it and had seen it somewhere, but couldn't remember where. A covered figure blocked the front door. Ethan tried to run for the back, but was once again met with the same shadowed being. He lunged at the dark entity, hoping this was all just a twisted dream he was having in the taxicab. But suddenly, time stopped. Boiling water droplets in broken pickle jars hung frozen in the air, fragments of their family portraits and knives merely props. Ethan's short breath stopped. His heart was in his throat as the figure approached him, its brown eyes cutting into Ethan's own. "You really shouldn't have returned," it croaked. "You don't belong here. Or don't you remember?" The entity dropped its cloak and stroked Ethan's cheek. It had Ethan's face. It was Ethan. "Let me help you." Ethan was released from time's grip and he closed his eyes. He wouldn't dare look the monster in its face. His face. It didn't take long for a wave of relaxation to wash over Ethan. He found solace imagining he was back on the shuttle, alongside Blim and the others. He missed looking out onto the bright expanse, dreaming of being outside cuddled next to his girl stargazing, looking right back at himself in the shuttle years away. The heavy weight of anxiety and loneliness lifted off his body. Ethan embraced the darkness. Moments passed, and suddenly the lyrics of Always on My Mind graced Ethan's ears, penetrating the thick silence. He opened his eyes and smiled. Three maidens cast piercing glares my way. Tramps, the folks called them. Others knew them as simply as the Dark Sisters. They tugged at their binds, squirming like a bunch of stretched worms against soaked tree trunks. "Repent." Father Bridget gave them another lash across the face. The whip butchered their powdered skin like a bull carcass in a lion pit. "Admit your sins in front of your brothers and sisters. Shout it so the good Lord can hear your pathetic confession." The sisters kept quiet, unflinching. This only further enraged the preacher. Bridget's face burned as he turned to face us. His eyes were glassy and his fingers twitched and tightened against the whip. There was no question that he was back on the spirits again. "Dare you stand at your post, denying the good people of Neckham an admission of guilt in the possession of young Bet Firstep?" The preacher pointed his scaly finger at me. "What about your little sister, Gloria? Will you not give her closure? Anything to ease her suffering? You three killed your mother after all." The silence was broken by a sneeze from the back. It was the baker, Marion Callister. Everybody said her flower would be the death of her. She swore it was the work of Satan and his 3 witches. Speak. The father whipped them another 4 times. Still nothing. Bridget wiped the sweat from his brow. Very well, you can die with your demons, harlots. Would dear Marianne please face the accused? Miss Callister cut through the crowd and joined the preacher at the front. Now tell us all what these sinister whores did to your health, Marianne. Despite being the source of Neckham's sweet treats, Marianne evidently did not indulge in her product. She was gaunt, her apron barely clinging to her thin waist. She had been part of the community since migrating from the homeland 60 years ago. They tarnished it, Father. The audience hissed obscenities, curses of their own, as the woman coughed in a dark handkerchief. Dust danced in the dry wind. They asked for a blackberry tart, but I explained that I ain't got no blackberries, as the harvest was spread too thin. Most of this season's batch was shipped to the capital, you see, and they left appalled. Shortly after was when I developed this painful cough. The crowd erupted. Burn the witches, they chanted. Cast the flame, Father. And he did exactly as the spectators demanded. In seconds, the 3 women were ablaze. Their screams would haunt the square for centuries. Father Pritchett stood tall and proud, confident that he just ridded the land of some more of Satan's slaves. The death of my older sisters did not affect me. The stench of their burning hair and their screams were enough to send the rest of the villagers back to their cottages, but I watched every moment. When the 3 girls walked in on me with the stones one afternoon, they threatened to tell the preacher. Everyone figured the village was rife with witches, thanks to hysteria in neighboring towns. And how great would they be regarded if they turned in the most powerful one of them all? So I cast a simple hex sealing their cancerous mouths and went to work. It's such a shame it had to come to this, I said to Father Pritchett, who was scribbling something in his journal, still at his post near my burning relatives. We live in dark, dark times, Gloria. The devil's shadow stretches far. Indeed, I walked back to my secret cottage in the woods, enjoying the smell of my sister's burning hair on the way. At the cusp of war, I entered my home with no bounds for the first time in a century.